To map or not to map? That is the question. Whether it is nobler to play in the theatre of your mind, or to do it on pen and paper. Kind.
What sort of nonsense is this? Everybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons uses a map and miniatures. Every one of them.
No, there is another. There is another way. It is in the theatre of your mind.
But is it even real if it happens in your mind?
Are your thoughts not real? This is very abstract. Today, on JNJtabletop, we're going to talk about theater of the mind versus playing on maps and grids and terrain.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Jake this is Josh, JNJtabletop, here talking about maps versus theater of the mind. And the reason why we're doing that is because, well, at the time that we're recording this video, this was last night, Josh is the DM for Ancient Relics and Hokey Religions on Rare Drop Roleplay. Go ahead and check us out on Sunday evenings. We'll have the link in the doobly-doo. And he ran a combat using theater of the mind. Gasp! Oh my gosh, yes, you can do it, even online. So, yeah, Josh, what made you feel like you wanted to do that combat with theater of the mind instead, and what's kind of like the difference, really?
Well, I feel like a thousand voices just cried out in pain and frustration that we just said, yes, we use Fantasy Grounds online, but also we do theater of the mind too. I think that both options are all ways that you could run combats. There's value to all of them. So theater of the mind being me as the DM, I'm explaining what's happening. I'm explaining what you're seeing, and this battlefield only takes place in our minds. I mean, you could still write it on paper just to get an idea in your head of what things look like, but there is no battle map. There's no like, you are here X spaces away from here. I think for me it builds up like a little bit more of a fog of war, and it also unlocks kind of like some more creativity for you.
Yeah.
And the alternative would be having some sort of battle map, or if you're together, then like having terrain and miniatures and tokens and all of those lovely things. And I love those things. I mean,
yeah, I actually enjoyed it much more than I would have guessed I would have. Obviously, I think the vast majority of the combats that we've run, just you and me, have been using maps, miniatures, tokens, depending on whether we were in person or online. But I actually found that the way I was describing Vale's actions when he went, I said he's just gonna kind of roll out to the left and do this. And I felt like this is actually really cool if you're listening to the podcast a little, because it's a little more like you're just telling a story than it is, well, I move here. It's like, okay, what's here? You know, like you can see it on the map, and I feel like a lot of times people that really enjoy the tactical side of D&D might be like, this isn't going to be any fun. But I tend to like the tactics quite a bit, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But that was part of the reason that I did it, was because it is an audio format too. So get something out there for those podcast people, because I'm a podcast person. But also I think it's a fun exercise in like creativity and imagination for all of us, because all of us were picturing that battlefield, and we knew that the monster was 35 feet away from you. But as far as the rest of it looked like, we all filled in the blanks differently. And I think that's an amazing part of this game, is that it's a shared experience, but it's also different for each of us. So I think it's fun to have that creative, like, just kind of, let's not be tied down to you're able to move X amount of squares, and let's just say like, this is what I want to try to do and explain it. And it's personally, that's the way I run theater of the mind. I let people be a little bit more cinematic with like, what you said was I just run over to the left and like shoot those arrows and stuff, and you know, just the way things are done is less. Maybe it's a little bit less tactical, and it might start to break down after like if you have a lot of combatants, it could get tough. But
You're getting ahead of us, I think, on the programming notes. But
yeah,
but it did seem a little more real to me as a participant, because instead of when I think about that combat now, I think about what I pictured during it instead of the picture of the map, or the, you know, because, and there could be some great sets out there. I mean, you have, you know, companies like Dwarven Forge, or even when we play with Matt and he would build these crazy dioramas and stuff. And I even have pictures of them in my phone, probably, or on Dropbox somewhere still, because they were so cool. And like, but that's how I picture that combat. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was great. Mm-hmm. But there is definitely something special to being like watching Echo charge this creature and then getting into a little bit of danger, and Vale rolls out and then just starts shooting his arrows at him. It just, I don't know, it made it feel more like a movie. I don't know how else to say that. And
Victorian nightgown Mac coming out with his cape.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh yeah, you gotta watch that. You gotta, it's up on YouTube now. There'll be a link to the playlist in the doobly-doo. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about how the two ways of doing combat are different, how would you say they're the same? I feel like, I mean, it is still combat, right? It's not like it's a totally different game just because you're doing it differently.
It's exactly that. Combat is still combat. It's still the same rules. It's still the same. You know, you're able to move X amount of spaces, like 30 feet, and still have your actions. All of those things. It's just explained differently. I think the difference is in the explanation.
I feel like with area of effect things, it could be a little different. So if I was to say cast like a lightning bolt or like a burning hands or something that has something like that in a theater of the mind, I think I would just say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. I know this is very different than regular D&D. Can I do this, Dungeon Master? Then you just answer it yes or no. So there's like a beauty in the simplicity, I think.
I think so too. Still doing the same things, just practicing those brain muscles, you know, doing it a little differently. And if that's tough for you, if it's hard to imagine that kind of thing, if you know, or you think there might be some sort of like theater of the mind combat, bring graph paper, bring a notebook, whatever. As things are explained to you, put a little dot, put a little X, put a little, you know, so you can see it right there. And I think if we were doing like a long form combat, that's probably what I would have done personally, just to keep track of everything. But since it was the party versus one enemy, it was easy enough to just track it that way.
So why should a group decide to use like maps and miniatures?
The obvious benefits there are you get a clear view of the whole battlefield. And I guess some games might be a little bit different in how they do things, where like you might actually put up some like sheet of paper or something for like a fog of war, or I don't know, some people get crazy with it, but in most cases you have a clear view, like a bird's eye view of the whole battlefield. And that's sort of like the game part of D&D, where like you're able to look down at this board as if you're playing a board game and move the pieces and work really well together. Like if you guys know each other's abilities and you're able to just move along, and you know, well, if I go to this square, then I could do this thing, and they could go to that square and do that thing. And you're probably able to get a little bit more tactical, and get a clear view of everything. Definitely less confusion. And also just terrain and minis, while they're insanely expensive in most cases, there's nothing like picking up a great mini, or when you're playing a game at the houseboat, and
the houseboat.
The houseboat. And suddenly Matt pulls out this castle that he's created out of like styrofoam or something, or toothpicks, or like some crazy thing. And just being able to see that, sometimes it's very cool to just get a in your face visualization of this is exactly what it looks like.
I feel like because of of all the things you just said, it would make larger scale combats. Like you had kind of alluded to the fact that there was just one opponent versus the party that made that a lot less cumbersome to try and keep track of. Like I feel like if you were to try and do like a Lord of the Rings style battle at Helm's Deep or something, you'd be like, where are we again? I forgot how many are there. Like that could get kind of confusing.
It's interesting though, because I think it does go both ways, because in most cases with that with like those big battles, you're going to want to know where all these things are and what's happening. You want to see the board, and that's if you're in your small like unit, we'll call it like squad or platoon level combat, right, for D&D. But if you're in that like mass battle, like you're in Pelennor Fields and you're just like you're out there with hundreds of thousands of like orcs and men, and you're all just fighting.
Yeah,
it could actually work pretty well for theater of the mind too.
And there's this concept, like it's like a joke, I guess, which is like, did you win D&D? But it's like a mindset sometimes, like especially if one of your primary motivations for playing is tactics and power gaming, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But once in a while, I do think once in a while I have to kind of grab my attention and say, this is a role-playing game. I'm playing a role. Like even some of the decisions I even made last night, I made because I know Vale's personality. Like I've played enough Skyrim to know there's dangerous traps and things and whatever it could be in a dungeon, but I'm playing Vale right now. This is the character I'm playing. So the decisions I make for him, yes, I can use some of my own experience and intelligence, but this is about what Vale would do in a situation. And I feel as though I just feel like theater of the mind would actually help that process along a little more organically.
It definitely can in some cases, even if like outside of combat, we could talk about like a dungeon like that. Like you guys went through a dungeon yesterday, or a ruin. If we had just explained things and explained what you saw instead of giving you a visualization of it too, then what would you have done differently? What would it have looked like in your mind, in your mind's eye, instead of what I showed you on the map that I made? Like, there's a strong case for both, and I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. I think it's just whatever you have time for it too, because some people don't have time especially for a streamed game. Like if you have to find maps that you're allowed to use, or you have to make maps yourself,
right?
And both can be time consuming or actually just cost money.
Yeah.
So that reason alone is a reason for theater of the mind too.
See if you agree with me on this. If I had to come up with one way to say this is the reason you should use maps, precision.
Yes.
If you want more precise measurements, you want to have much more. Oh, you step on this square? Yes. Okay. Now you're gonna, down comes the guillotine. That's the trap. You just triggered it. Whatever the case may be. Precision. If that is very important to you as a DM and your players, and like Josh said, there's nothing wrong with landing on that decision. It's by far the most common, I would say, in this culture for D&D. Is there any game that you've played in the past that maybe if we were using theater of the mind, it just would not have been the same experience for you?
Absolutely. It would be the last game that I played in, which hopefully the viewers have seen, Dragon of Icespire Peak campaign that the incredible Jake ran for us. Playing as Marcus, playing as that battle master fighter who everything about him was tactics, and everything about him was like, I can figure out, especially with like I had Polearm Master and Sentinel, which we'll talk about feats another time, but holy crap. Just everything about this character was like, I see all of these squares, and I know that if I go here, then this person's probably going to come here, and I'll be able to hit them and stop them and do that. And like, it made having that map and having that precision and being able to think so far ahead. Like, I was playing like D&D chess with Marcus, and I loved it. Like I'll just briefly touch on this because this is a whole other topic, but I only played range characters for a long time because I felt like sometimes, like with a melee character, you just get up with the hack and slash and that's it, whatever. But playing this character and having that map and being able to see everything and like take in all of these things at once and make those split second decisions and control the battlefield, having that kind of battlefield control and precision with him totally changed like my opinion. Now I'm like, there's just so much fun in all of it.
Yeah.
And if we did that in Theater of the Mind, I don't think, even maybe if my character still had that kind of control, I wouldn't have felt like I had that kind of control because I wouldn't have been able to envision it the same way as looking at it on a grid.
Yeah, I think that's really fair because it's almost like that measure of precision was part of the story. So Marcus, you know, he's a character you made, but everything I've learned about Marcus as his DM is, you know, he comes from a very proud family of warriors, and that's just their life. Like we study war, we study combat, we study tactics. Precision is what they do. You know, you have a polearm, you know, you have the reach for a reason. You're keeping your opponent at bay, especially if it's like a monster or something crazy. You know, if you plant yourself, you do so deliberately, and using a map would certainly emphasize that fact. So I hit record again. It seems fine.
Okay.
I guess whenever you're ready, we can always do it again if we have to.
That's what she said.
To map or not to map? That is the question.
You mean you can play Dungeons and Dragons without using a map and miniatures?
Yes, and it is better this way.
That theater sounds like Poppycock to me.
The theater is in your mind. Your creativity and imagination is limitless. I'm turning into Bane.
This sounds like a bunch of malarkey.
Bring the power back to you, the people.
Indeed. I don't know why I'm doing this. Quite right you are.
Thank you.
I think sometimes things like cones and lines and flanking can be maybe a bit more confusing, but you know.
I
think we're redoing this one.